Long ago, in a beautiful kingdom surrounded by forests, rivers, and shining mountains, there lived a gentle young girl named Cinderella. She had once lived a happy life with her loving father and mother in a warm countryside home. Her mother would tell her stories by the fireplace and braid flowers into her hair. Her father would bring her small gifts from the village market and laugh with her in the garden. But happiness does not always stay forever. When Cinderella was still very young, her beloved mother fell ill and passed away. Before leaving the world, she held Cinderella's hand and said, "Always stay kind, no matter how dark life becomes. Kindness will guide you to your destiny." Cinderella never forgot those words. Years later, her father married again, hoping to give Cinderella a new family. But the woman he married was cold-hearted and proud. She had 2 daughters of her own, both selfish and cruel. At first, they pretended to be kind. But after Cinderella's father also passed away unexpectedly during a long journey, everything changed. Her stepmother took control of the house and all of her father's belongings. She forced Cinderella to leave her bedroom and sleep near the kitchen fireplace. Every day, Cinderella was made to wake before sunrise. She scrubbed floors until her hands hurt. She washed clothes in freezing water. She cooked meals she was never allowed to eat at the table. And when night came, she slept among the ashes beside the fire. Because her face and dress were often covered in soot, the stepsisters mocked her and called her Cinderella. Yet despite everything, Cinderella remained gentle. She spoke kindly to the birds who visited the garden. She smiled at the old village baker. She helped lost children find their homes. Deep inside her heart, she still believed that life could change. Far away, in the royal palace, the king had grown worried about his son, the prince. The prince was handsome and kind, but he had little interest in marriage. He spent his days reading in the palace gardens and riding his horse through the forests. The king decided to hold the grandest royal ball the kingdom had ever seen. Every young woman in the land would be invited. The prince would choose his future bride at the ball. The news spread like wildfire. The entire kingdom became excited. When Cinderella heard, her heart leaped. She had never been to the palace.
Then her stepmother entered. Her face turned dark with anger. "How dare you?" she hissed. The stepsisters laughed cruelly. They pulled at the dress, ripped the ribbons, tore the sleeves apart. The pearls scattered across the floor. "You are only a servant," her stepmother said coldly. "You belong here." Then they left for the palace, leaving Cinderella alone. She ran into the garden and sat beneath the old willow tree. Tears fell onto the grass. The sky darkened. The first stars appeared. And then something extraordinary happened. A silver light shimmered among the flowers. An old woman appeared, dressed in robes that sparkled like moonlight. Her eyes were kind. "Why are you crying, child?" she asked. Cinderella looked up in surprise. "I wanted to go to the ball," she whispered, "but now I have nothing." The woman smiled. "Oh, but you have everything that matters." With a gentle wave of her wand, the air filled with glowing sparks. The pumpkin near the garden gate transformed into a magnificent golden carriage. The mice became elegant white horses. The old dog became a proud coachman. Cinderella gasped. Then the fairy godmother touched her torn dress. It transformed into a breathtaking gown made of silver and blue silk. Tiny stars shimmered across the fabric. Crystal slippers appeared on her feet.
The fairy godmother smiled. "You may go to the ball,
But remember, when the clock strikes midnight, the magic will end. Cinderella promised and stepped into the carriage. At the palace, the royal ball had already begun. Music echoed through the grand halls. Nobles danced beneath chandeliers of crystal. The prince stood politely among the guests, though none had captured his interest. Then, the palace doors opened. Cinderella entered. The entire hall fell silent. She looked like moonlight itself. The prince could not look away. He walked directly toward her and bowed. "May I have this dance?" Cinderella smiled shyly, and together they stepped onto the ballroom floor. They danced as if time itself had stopped. The prince was captivated, not just by her beauty, but by her kindness and warmth. They spoke of dreams, of forests, of stars. For the first time in years, Cinderella laughed freely. Hours passed like moments. Then suddenly, the great clock began to strike midnight. Cinderella's face changed. She remembered the warning. Without explanation, she ran. The prince called after her, but she was already racing down the palace staircase. One crystal slipper slipped from her foot. She did not stop. By the time the prince reached the gate, she had vanished into the night. All that remained was the crystal slipper. The next morning, the prince made a vow. He would search the entire kingdom. He would marry the girl whose foot fit the slipper. Royal guards traveled from village to village. Every girl tried. None fit. At last, they came to Cinderella's home. Her stepsisters pushed each other aside to try first. They squeezed and forced their feet into the slipper, but it would not fit. Then Cinderella quietly stepped forward. "May I try?" Her stepmother shouted, "No, she is only a servant." But the prince, who had joined the search himself, looked at Cinderella closely. There was something familiar in her eyes. He nodded. Cinderella slipped her foot into the crystal slipper. It fit perfectly. The room fell silent. Then Cinderella reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out the second crystal slipper. The prince smiled with joy. It was you. The stepmother and stepsisters were speechless. Soon, Cinderella was taken to the palace. The kingdom celebrated for days. The wedding was the most beautiful in history. But what amazed everyone most was not her gown nor her crown. It was her heart. Cinderella chose kindness. She forgave her stepmother and stepsisters. She welcomed them to the celebration. And though they had been cruel, she showed mercy. Years later, people would tell stories of the queen who had once slept among ashes, the queen whose kindness changed her fate. And every year at the royal ball, Cinderella and the prince would dance together beneath the chandeliers, just as they had on the night their story began. And they lived happily ever after. The end.